Parsha Terumah means contributions, free will offerings. And it says there, Yahweh spoke to Moshe, and he said, tell the sons of Israel to set aside a terumah for me, from every man whose heart prompts him to give it. You shall accept them from the following contributions: gold, silver, bronze, purple stuffs, violet shade, and red crimson stuff, fine linen, goat's hair, ram skins dyed red, fine leather, acacia wood, oil for the lamp, spices for the chrism, and for the fragrant incense, onyx stones and gems to be set aside for the ephod and pectoral. And so today's teaching is another chapter in the journey of Moshe from Egypt to Israel. And we left Egypt, our ancestors left Egypt, and we were brought to Sinai, the mountain. And there in Sinai, Adonai gave us the 10 words, what has frequently been called the 10 Commandments. And we received his covenant. That was his covenant. In last week's study, chapter 24, the covenant that he gave, remember, and this is very important in figuring and placing the chronology in our mind. Chapter 24 is important because when Adonai gave the 10 words, remember, Moshe was at the bottom of the mountain, not like the movie. Moshe was at the bottom of the mountain. And Adonai spoke with thunder and lightning and the sound of the shofar. And Adonai spoke the covenant, Ani Yahweh, I am Yahweh, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other Elohim before my face. And then he goes on to speak the 10 words or the 10 phrases. And that was his covenant to us. And then Adonai calls Moshe up the mountain. Moshe goes up the mountain again. He had already been up there several times. And he goes up the mountain. And Adonai tells him there in 24:1 to come, bring Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel to bow down and worship at a distance. It's interesting that Sinai was like the temple. The top of Sinai was the Holy of Holies. That was the place where the burning bush was. That was the place where Moshe was up there and he saw that bush. It was burning, but they wouldn't burn up. And Adonai says, take off your sandals, for the place you are standing on is holy ground. And then there was that middle area where Adonai allows Joshua, Aaron, the 70 elders, he allows them to come to that holy place. They can't go up. They got to keep their distance. They can't go into the Holy of Holies. They could only go into that holy place. And of course, the people are outside. And so over here we see even the whole Sinai area to be as a temple. In fact, the Garden of Eden was that inner sanctum of Adonai, where Adonai and Adam walk hand in hand in the cool of the day. And that's where Adonai spoke and taught Adam, our father. But notice when sin came in, he had to go out of the camp. When you're in sin, you're out of the camp. In fact, Yeshua taught and Paul taught about excommunication. When believers are not working right, they have to be put out of the camp. There's this idea of that holiness of Adonai, of coming to Adonai. And over here, in verse 3, Moshe went and told the people all the commands of Adonai. He come down again. And all the ordinances. In answer to all the people said with one voice, we will observe all the commands that Yahweh has decreed. So notice, before Moses goes up the mountain the first time, in fact, before the giving of the Torah, of the commandments, of the covenant, even before Adonai gives us a covenant, the people said, we will obey. Now he gives the covenant. Now the people again say, we will what? We will obey. We will obey everything that Adonai has said. And then, verse 4, please underline this one. Moshe put all the mitzvot, the commands of Yahweh, into writing. Into what? Into writing. So the first giving of the 10 commandments were audible. Adonai spoke it from the heavens, from the top of the mountain, and the people, Moshe and the people listened. And then Moshe goes up and then comes down, tells all the people the commands, and he puts the 10 commandments, the covenant, into writing. He writes it on a scroll. So all we have now is a scroll with the 10 commandments. And then, early the next morning, he built an altar in the foot of the mountain with 12 standing stones for the 12 tribes of Israel. Then he directed certain young Israelites to offer a holocaust and to immolate bullocks to Yahweh as communion sacrifices. Half of the blood Moshe took up and put into basins. The other half he cast on the altar. And taking the scroll of the covenant. Okay, now look what he did. Let's be very careful here and connect the dots. Moshe now writes the covenant, the 10 commandments, on a scroll. What is called here a book. Sefer Brit, it's called in Hebrew, a Sefer Brit. A Sefer is a book or a scroll. Today, we don't use scrolls. We put everything in a codex style or a book form. But Moses wrote the covenant, the 10 commandments down. And then they sacrifice some bullocks, some bulls. And he gets the blood. He gets the blood of the sacrifices. And half of it, he sprinkles and throws on the altar to Adonai as a sacrifice to Adonai. The other half of the blood, he cast on the altar, and taking the scroll of the covenant, the 10 commandments, he read it to the listening people, and again they say, we will observe all that Yahweh has decreed. Then Moses took the blood, the other half, and cast it towards the people. And watch what he says. Watch what he says. So half he cast to the altar, the other half he cast towards the people. He sprinkled towards the people. And watch what he said. This is the blood of the covenant that Yahweh has made with you containing these mishpatim, these mitzvot. Here is where Adonai makes a covenant with Israel. Think of it. The covenant was given orally, audibly. Now Moshe writes it down and he reads it to the people. And they say, we will agree, we will observe. In other words, they signed on the dotted line. And when they signed on the dotted line, every covenant comes with blood. Every covenant comes with blood. Every covenant that Adonai has made will make. It has to have blood. Remember, Abraham passes through the animals. Blood was shed. The covenant of grace that Adonai gave to Adam. Adonai was the first one to sacrifice the lamb when Adam sinned. And that was a covenant that Adonai made with Adam, that I will clothe you. I will cover your guilt and shame, always with the lamb, always the same motif, the same story. And that's what Yeshua is all about, as we will see. This is the blood of the covenant. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound very familiar? Moshe says, this is the blood of the covenant. This is Chadam Brit, the blood of the covenant. Interestingly enough, on the night that Yeshua was betrayed, he took a cup. And what were his words? This is the cup of the Brit Chadashah in my blood. This is the cup of the new covenant. Now the word new there, Chadashah, is the word renewed covenant. Renewed covenant. Now, this is the first covenant. Moshe is giving us the first covenant, which is the 10 Commandments. Every one of us is liable to the 10 Commandments. Everyone here. We are liable to the 10 Commandments. Now, we broke the 10 Commandments. How many of you broke the 10 Commandments? Literally, figuratively, we've broken the 10 Commandments. At least the majority have. There's some people that didn't raise their hands. I guess we have some perfect people here. How many of you have broken at least one commandment? Still. One of these days we'll get you all to admit, I'm a sinner. Every one of us has broken all 10 commandments plus hundreds of times, literally and or figuratively. We have broken them. If we've hated, we've broken the commandment. If we looked lustfully, we've broken the commandments. And remember, when you break one commandment, you've broken the whole thing. You know, you can't just break part of a window. Have anybody broken just part of a window? You can't break part of a window. You break the window and the window's broken. We've broken Torah. We've broken the covenant. In fact, we're going to see that as Moshe was up there receiving the third edition on stones, the people were downstairs breaking the very commandments that he was giving us on stone after audibly giving it to us, after giving it to us in written form. Now we are getting them in stone and we're breaking them downstairs. This is the blood of the covenant that Yahweh has made with you, containing all these mitzvot, all these commandments. Yeshua, knowing that from the time that Moshe gave us the scroll here, to his time and to the end times, we've all broken it, so Yeshua renews the covenant. What's called the New Testament is not just a set of books. The new covenant is Adonai giving us a renewed covenant, renewing the first covenant. There's nothing in the first covenant that has been taken away or added. The first covenant is still liable on all believers who accept Yahweh and his way of life, his chaderech, as their way. And Yeshua is the door that gets anyone into that covenant. And so, going on here, Moses went up with Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, 70 elders, and they saw the Elohim of Israel beneath whose feet where he was. It seemed a sapphire. And he laid no hand on these notables of the sons of Israel. They gazed upon Elohim, and they ate and drank. And so they go up midpoint. And of course, they can't see his face. They just saw as his feet. There was a thick cloud, and there was darkness. And they could only see, because they could only go so far. Only Moshe could go up further. And he has gone, and he will go up further again himself. And then it says they ate and drank. So they had a fellowship meal. All covenants, after the sacrifice has been done, and it's a communion sacrifice, then they eat and drink. They eat the meat, they have bread, and they have wine. Yahweh said to Moshe, come up to the mountain and stay there while I give you the stone tablets, the Torah and the Mishpatim that I have written for their instruction. So not only now is he going to give them the 10 commandments, the covenant in tablet form, but he's also going to give them Mishpatim, other guidelines, other decrees, other things. Accordingly, Moses rose, he and his servant Joshua, and they came up to the mountain of Elohim. To the elders he said, wait here for us until we come back. You have Aaron and Hur with you. If anyone has a difference, let him go. And Moshe went up the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain. And the kavod of Yahweh, the glory of Yahweh, settled on the mountain of Sinai for 6 days. The cloud covered it, and the seventh day Yahweh called to Moshe from inside the cloud. To the eyes of the sons of Israel, the glory, the kavod of Yahweh seemed like the devouring fire on the mountaintop. Moshe went up into the cloud. He went up to the mountain and stayed there for 40 days and 40 nights. 40 days and 40 nights. So that's the third giving of the Torah now, this time in stone formation. By the way, from now till chapter 32, from the end of chapter 24 to chapter 32, Moshe is on top of the mountain receiving the 10 Commandments in written form, and also receiving all the other mitzvot, all the other mishpatim, all the other hukim that make up the rest of the Torah. And for 40 days he's up there till chapter 32, and in chapter 32 he'll come down. So the first thing in the first day of those 40 days, we come to our parsha today. Yahweh spoke to Moshe, and he said, tell the sons of Israel to set aside a contribution for me. Now, a terumah is what we call an offering, a free will offering. Today we call them love offerings. A love offering. These are love offerings. These are terumot. These are contributions, offerings that you give from the free will of your heart. This is not a law, by the way. There's this idea that we don't have to tithe today. Except on some congregations, they don't believe in the Sabbath, they don't believe in Passover, they don't believe in all that. But the only law is tithing. Can you feature that? They don't believe in Torah, but they believe just in one idea of Torah, tithing. Now, if we're going to take what Adonai says, we better believe the whole thing or nothing. We can't say, well, I like the Torah for me is a smorgasbord. I like this. Oh, I don't like that. Oh, man, that I don't like. But there are a lot of people that don't like tithing. They don't, it's spinach to them. But let me tell you, spinach is good. How many like spinach? Spinach is healthy, right? Spinach is better than a Big Mac. How many know that spinach is better than a Big Mac? Spinach is better than a piece of pie, than a candy, than a Hershey's. But we don't like the spinach and we like the candy. That's the way we are. And so we pick and choose. Well, let me tell you, tithing is not up to you. It doesn't have, it doesn't matter if you like to tithe or not. You have to tithe. You see, tithing is a duty. It's a duty. Now, a lot of people have this crazy idea, idiotic idea that says, I'll only tithe if I feel like it. No. Tithing is not about feelings. Tithing is a command. And what tithing is that when you get your weekly check, monthly check, whatever, when you get a amount of money, when someone gives you an inheritance, when you get whatever, Adonai says, 1/10 of that is mine. Did you know 1/10 of that is mine? Oh, wait a second. These preachers, they're always asking for money. God's always asking for money. You know what that tithe is for, by the way? Anybody understand what the tithe? The tithe is for your beating heart. The tithe is for your life. How many of you use heart beating? Most of you again. There might be people here with no beating hearts. My beating heart. Tithing is what you owe Adonai for your life. For him continually going. And the only time that you stop tithing is when you are in his presence. Tithing is for the world. Tithing is for everybody. In fact, everybody should tithe to Adonai. Remember the first murder? The first murder occurred because of the tithe. One tithed, the other was a little, it says, Cain gave some of the produce, some. Abel gave the first part, the first fruit, the firstborn. Cain gave some, and I could just see him giving, and then, I'll give the leftovers. Or I'll give those apples that are a little day old, a week old. They're kind of getting soft. I don't need them. I'll give that. And then he sees a good one, so he takes it back. There are people who tip Elohim. He doesn't need our tip. He demands our tithe. And so a tithe is what every person needs to give. If you receive 10 cents, your tithe is a penny. If $10, then your tithe is $1. If it's $100, it's $10. If it's $1,000, it's $100, and so forth, that you take out immediately and you give it to Adonai, first fruits. Now, after that comes the offerings. The offerings are free will. The offerings are what you want. The offerings are anything extra you want to give. And remember, in 2 Corinthians 8 and so, Paul is talking about offerings. And even with offerings, he says, the more you give, the more you sow, the more you reap. The more you sow in offerings, not tithing. The only thing you reap from tithing is your life. And Adonai demands, think of the amount of money that Adonai that people are liable for that are not believers, that are believers and are not tithing. Adonai is going to demand that again. You say, well, if they're not believers, they're not liable to Torah. You see, not everybody's liable to every portion of Torah. But every human that has ever lived is liable to certain portions of Torah, that which affects them. For example, every human is liable to the marriage law. Every human is liable to the marriage law. Adonai told Adam, it says there that he brought Adam, made him male and female. He blessed them and told them, be fruitful and multiply. So if you are a son and daughter of Adam and Eve, then you're liable because he gave it to him. And what is a father supposed to do? Disciple his children, and disciple their children, and disciple their children. And the discipleship worked. You know, in fact, Cain even got married. And there was marriages, all of a sudden things started falling apart. Polygamy came in. And all of a sudden all kinds of other stuff came in. Immorality came in. Because we've broken what Adonai wants. But Adonai's marriage, tithing, in fact, did you know that kosher is for the whole world? The whole world, kosher is not a Jewish thing. Kosher has nothing to do with Israel. Kosher has to do with the sons of Adam and the sons of Noah. How many of you are sons of Noah now? Everybody here is son of Noah? Whether you're from Ham, Shem, or Japheth, we're a son of Noah. Adonai gave Noah, and Noah knew this. He didn't have to be taught. Adonai told Noah, take 7 pairs of the clean animals and 2 pairs of the unclean animals. There's a kind of a misunderstanding among Sunday school people that he told them to take 2 of the unclean and 2 of the clean. No. 2 and 2 of every animal. No, it's 7 pairs of the clean and only 1 pair, 2, a male and female, of the unclean. Why? Because of 2 things. After the ark rested and Noah got out, what Noah did is Noah offered sacrifices to Adonai. And it says he offered sacrifices of all the clean animals. You see, Adonai will not accept an unclean animal as a sacrifice. An unclean animal is an abomination to Adonai. That's why the abomination of desolation, when Antiochus set up a statue and sacrificed a pig in the altar of Yahweh, that was an abomination that desolated the temple, that the kavod of Adonai left the temple. Well, let's go back here. And so give me a contribution, and you'll accept the contribution from every man. Every man. From every worker. Of course, in those days, every man had a wife and a family. So from every family, from every nuclear family group, in gold, silver, even linen, and all kinds of things. So this contribution was for what? Watch what it says here in verse 6. Build me a mishkan so that I can shakan among them. Build me a sanctuary. The term sanctuary is a dwelling place, a mishkan, a dwelling place, that I may dwell, shikan, among them, that my kavod might dwell among them. And the word kavod is the word for glory. Now, I know in the past we have used the word Shekinah or Shekhinah in Hebrew, the Shekinah glory. How many have heard the Shekinah glory? And we've used that. But in my studies, I have found that the word Shekinah, although it comes from Shekhin, to dwell, is not found in Scripture. The word Shekinah is actually a Jewish Kabbalah term for the feminine aspect of Elohim called the Holy Spirit. They believe that the Holy Spirit is a feminine force of Adonai, and they call her the Shekhinah. So when Adonai appears in what they call the Shekhinah glory, it's his feminine form. But that's all a bunch of Kabbalistic hogwash. Totally hogwash. But it's his kavod. Build me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. Now, this verse here is part of the key of Scripture. That I may dwell among them. That I may what? Dwell among them. Let's go back to the garden. Adonai made the garden, and there he put Adam and Eve in the garden. And Adonai would come in the cool of the day and talk with Adam. That was probably what I call his discipleship time, his teaching time. There in the garden was the first Mishkan, the first Holy of Holies, the first place where Elohim dwelt with man. In fact, a later word that will be used is Immanuel. Immanuel is Elohim with man, Elohim among us, Elohim with us. In our Immanuel, in our presence, the presence of Elohim among us. And there in the garden was Immanuel, Elohim was among us. But of course, we blew it and we got kicked out. But there's this thing of Adonai. There's something in Adonai that he wants to be with you. I've said many times. No matter how much we say, I want to be with him. Oh, I'd love to be in his presence. I love his presence. A little while ago, we had a little mini time of his presence. How many of you enjoyed that mini time of his presence? It was just a breath. It was just here and gone. And we could have many of those. We want to be with him. We want to spend eternity with him. But more than what you want to do with him, he wants to do with you. The children do not want to spend as much time with the parents as the parents with the children. Those of you that have lost your parents, how much do you wish you would have made it the opposite? How much, oh, I could have spent more time. Oh, more this, more that. And our parents, and then now that we're parents, we want, oh, you know, why doesn't Zach call? You know? Where's Ariel? I haven't seen Ariel for 3 weeks now, 4 weeks? No. We want to be with them. And Adonai wants to be with you. Build me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. Build me a mishkan. Build me a tent, a tabernacle, it'll be called, that I may dwell among them. In other words, because they were tent dwellers, they were Sukkot dwellers, Adonai wants his own sukkah. Build me a sukkah, that I may dwell among them in the midst of their Sukkot, in the midst of their tents, of their little tabernacles. Build me a sanctuary. After this, we're going to see 1 Kings 6:1. Adonai tells David and his son Solomon, who builds the first Mikdash, the first temple. That temple's destroyed, and all of a sudden Yeshua comes, and Yeshua, oh, that's getting ahead of ourselves. We'll talk about that later. In making the tabernacle and its furnishings, you must follow exactly the pattern I will show you. You must follow exactly the pattern I will show you. In other words, Adonai here is the master architect. How many of you are any architects here, or you've done architectural work? You know, when you are an architect, you make some blueprints, some patterns. You talk with the owner, you know, what kind of house do you want? Oh, I want a house like this. And in fact, the other day I was looking at, did you know that there are blueprints and patterns for the Bonanza house? You know, I've always loved the Bonanza house, you know, and the Bonanza, you know, with what are their names? The Cartwrights, and the little house, and you know, it just looks so cozy, doesn't it? You know, that all those books on this side, and all those, you know, that where all the guns, you know, 30-30s and all these guns are. And it just looks so cozy. You know, they actually sell the blueprints for that house, and you could build that house yourself. But if you do, you have to follow the blueprint. You have to follow the pattern exactly, and the builder has to interpret what the architect put down to the inch, to the half inch. Because if not, if you build without a pattern, without, you know, some of it's going to be high, low, you know, the doors aren't going to fit right. You know, things are not going to be right. Sometimes I think the guy who built our house didn't have a blueprint, because yeah, some of the workers that I've had, I don't know, sometimes like Sergio or Michael or Don have come to work on the plumbing or the electricity, and in fact, Michael had a big hard time working What's this board doing there? We couldn't find out. What? There's a board in the middle of some place that shouldn't have a board there. Follow the pattern exactly. Now, why does Adonai want us to follow the pattern exactly? Because the tabernacle, the sanctuary, is a copy, is a replica of the Mishkan in the third heaven where Adonai dwells. It's a copy. This is a copy. Now, I wish we had the time to go, but we could, at this point, we could go to the book of Hebrews. And in the book, in fact, let's go there if you guys don't mind. In the book of Hebrews, and in the book of Hebrews, we have what? Go with me to chapter 9, verse 22. In fact, he says, according to Torah, almost everything has to be purified with blood. And if there's no shedding of blood, there is no redemption. Obviously, only the copies of heavenly things can be purified in this way. Only the copies of what? Heavenly things, it says. And the heavenly things themselves have to be purified by a higher sort of sacrifice than this. It is not as though Messiah had entered a man-made Mishkan, a man-made sanctuary, which was only modeled on the real one. So we're talking about a model. Moshe is to build a model, a replica of the real one. But it was heaven itself, so that he should appear in the actual presence of Elohim with Adonai. And so Yeshua did not go to a man-made sanctuary and offer his blood. No, the man-made sanctuary is only a model. That tells us that on a day-by-day basis, when blood was sprinkled for sin, for the remission of the sin, that was only a model, that was only a practice, that was only a rehearsal. And when Yeshua went into the Holy of Holies, into the heavenly one, the real one, before the presence of Adonai, in his tabernacle up in the heavens, and he offered his blood, that paid for the sin once and for all, it says there. Once and for all. Once and for everyone. Once and for all time. Once and for all. And so that's why Moshe was told, make it exactly according to the blueprint, the pattern that I show you. So when you see pictures of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle in the wilderness, or of Solomon's temple, you will see a picture of what's in heaven. The throne of Adonai has a Holy of Holies, has an Ark of the Covenant, and has two real angels, two real cherubs on both sides of the mercy seat. And that's where Yeshua, as our high priest, deposited his blood. And the whole temple service, the whole sacrificial system is built or was built here to Moshe for what Yeshua was going to do later on. Forever. So make sure that you make it. And we're not going to look at this. We've looked at this many times in other things. The ark, the first thing there in verse 10, he makes the ark and tells how to make the ark. Inside the ark in verse 16, you are to place the testimony, which are the tablets, that I shall give you. You are to make a throne of mercy. Watch what verse 22 says. There I shall come to meet you, and from above the throne of mercy, from between the two cherubs that are on the ark of the testimony, I shall give you all the commands for the sons of Israel. So that is kind of like the headquarters. That's the hot spot that Adonai is going to use now. And then verse 23, the table for the bread. Verse 31, the lampstand, the menorah. 26 verse 1, the tabernacle itself. And again, in 26:30 it says, this is how you are to erect the tabernacle according to the model shown to you on the mountain. So everything has to go according to the pattern. And then in 31 there, he makes the veil to separate the ark of the testimony, and the veil will serve to separate the holy place from the Holy of Holies, the throne of mercy, the ark inside. And so Adonai has these levels, these places that we go to. And every one of us is constantly getting closer. And where you are now is not where you were before. And where you are now is not where you're going to be in the future. It's always a growing thing. It's getting a closer. You say, I can't get close. But then you get closer. And through all those times, Satan's going to throw what? All kinds of things to discourage us. He's going to bring thoughts. But we're going to keep on keeping on. In chapter 27, he makes the altar. And in chapter 9, he makes the court. Well, he's told to make, you shall make. Now, what's interesting is that these chapters, Adonai is telling Moshe, you shall make, you shall make. Notice, if you underline all those you shall makes, you'll have, I think, like 18, 19 of them. You shall make, you shall make, you shall make. And then, when we get further on, we're going to have a whole parsha where, and he made, and he made, and he made, and he made. So this is you shall make, and then he will make. Now, I'm going to digress here to our Haftarah. Now, what's interesting is that every Torah portion has a Haftarah. Now, the Haftarah is the word additional or additions. And so for every Torah reading, there's always a Haftarah reading for that. Yeshua, when he went to Nazareth, read from the Haftarah of Isaiah. From the additional portion, somebody had read the Torah portion, and then somebody read the Haftarah. And Yeshua has chosen to read the Haftarah. Go with me to the book of 1 Kings. 1 Kings is the Haftarah for Terumah. Now, this is one of those Haftarah that makes sense. Some of the Haftarahs, it's kind of hard to figure out why is that talking about the Torah portion. But this one in 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 1, is very apropos, because this is the building of the temple. And now it actually begins in chapter 5, talking about the building of the temple and the raising of levies. Interestingly enough, Adonai says, give me a terumah, an offering. And it's a free will offering. Well, one of the things that by the time of Solomon, one of the things that he did is he offered a levy from every person. And a levy would be something like a tax. And everyone was taxed or levied that you bring this much money so that we could build the temple. Now, building a sanctuary, tabernacle, was hard and it was costly, but the building of an actual temple of stone and gold was even more expensive, in the millions of dollars today. In the 480th year, after the Israelites came out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is the 2nd month, he began to build the temple of Yahweh. By the way, underline this verse, put it in yellow, bracket it, because this is an anchor verse for biblical theology, for biblical chronology, for biblical geography. This is an anchor verse that it is 400 years, an 80th year, 480 years since the Exodus. Since the Exodus. And on this year is when Moshe started building the temple. Now, according to calculations, it is around the year 970 that that Solomon begins to build the temple. And from there we could figure out Solomon and the kings and all the way up to Yeshua. Now, he starts building the temple, and by the way, I have the calculations on that on Wednesday night. We could go through those. He starts building the temple for Yahweh. Now remember, the tabernacle of Moses went with us for 40 years in the wilderness. As we went around in circles in the desert for 40 years, the tabernacle was set up, put down. Set up, put down. Set up, and sometimes for a week, sometimes for a month, a couple of times for several years. We crossed the Jordan with the Ark of the Covenant in front of us. The tabernacle was pitched in the city of Shiloh. Some of you have been to Shiloh. The mayor and one of the rabbis of Shiloh comes here once a year to tell us about the Shiloh Children's Group. And we helped the Shiloh Children's Group, the place where the tabernacle was first set up. Some of you have been there. And from there, it went to several places. The ark, if you remember, was captured by the Philistines, and then David brings the ark and he builds a new tabernacle. I guess the old tabernacle by this time had gotten old and worn out. David builds a new tabernacle. And then David says to Adonai, you know what, Adonai? I'm living in a palace, and you're still dwelling in a sukkah. I am going to build you a house. I am going to build you a house. And Adonai says, no, David, you will not build me a house because you have blood in your hands. You can't build me a house. You have blood in your hands. But, David, because you are a man after my own heart. Now remember, even in David's sin was he a man after Adonai's own heart. Because what did he do when he sinned. Boom, he got on his face and repented. See, it doesn't matter how many times you fall. What matters is what? How many times you stand up. And David was one of those guys that fell a number of times. But one of the things about David is he always got up and he always got on his knees and he always repented and he always praised Adonai for his grace. You're not going to build me a house, but I'm going to build you a house. David, if you and your sons are faithful to me, you shall never lack a male descendant to sit on the throne. And I am going to build the house of David. The Messiah, according to Genesis, was going to come from Judah. The Messiah was going to come from David. And so the house of David, when the angel comes to Mary and said, you are going to have a son from the house of David, Yeshua was that promise. And so because of his hands, he couldn't build the tabernacle, the temple. So Solomon, and read chapter 5 and that will catch you up. And Solomon builds, and he builds it just like the tabernacle. Adonai had given David all the plans for the temple. Adonai had given David everything. David had already started collecting money. Everything was ready. David had the blueprints. And Solomon starts building them according to the blueprints. And Adonai, of course, there had to be different blueprints because now it's not a tent. Now it's a house of stone. And so Adonai gives him blueprints. And there it says, the cherubs, how he built the cherubs, the doors. Chapter 6, verse 37. In the 4th year, in the month of Ziv, the foundation of the temple was laid. In the 11th year of the month of Bul, that is the 8th month, the temple was completed. Exactly as it had been planned and designed, Solomon took 7 years to build it. Now the tabernacle took 1 year to build in the wilderness under Sinai. But now the temple, it took 7 years to build that according to the blueprints. The same thing. And by the way, besides all the outward stuff, the tabernacle, the temple, like the Garden of Eden, like heaven itself, have the same pattern. It's always 3 sections. The Holy of Holies, the inner sanctum, the holy place, and the court. It's always in a form of 3. The body, the outside tabernacle, the outside walls. The soul, the mind, will, emotions, the place of the menorah, the table of showbread, and the altar of incense. And then the spirit, the Holy of Holies, the inside. You, the Holy of Holies, your Holy of Holies, your spirit is the dwelling place of Adonai. In fact, I wish we could even go there to, in fact, let's go there. Go with me to 1 Corinthians. You guys are making me work harder today. And I hope you don't have a roast in the oven or whatever. But let's go to, thank you, Father. Let's go to 1 Corinthians. First Corinthians chapter 6. Verse 15. You know surely well that your bodies are members making up the body of Messiah. Do you think I could take parts of Messiah's body and join him to the body of a harlot? Never. As you know, a man who goes with a harlot is one flesh with her. Since the two, as Torah says, become one flesh. But anyone who is joined to Yahweh is one spirit with him. Keep away from fornication. All the other sins are committed outside the body. But to fornicate is to sin against your own body. Your body, you know, is the temple of the Holy Spirit, who is in you, since you have received him from Elohim. You are not your own property. You have been bought and paid for. That is why you should never use your body unless it's for the glory of Elohim. Now go to 2 Corinthians chapter 6 again, verse 14. Do not yoke yourselves in an uneven team with unbelievers. Virtue is no companion for crime. Light and darkness have nothing in common. Messiah is not the friend of Belair, one of the Baals, nor has a believer anything to share with an unbeliever. The temple of Elohim has no common ground with idols. And that is what we are. The temple of the living Elohim. We have Elohim's word for it. I will make my home among them and live with them. I will be their Elohim and they shall be my people. Then come away from them and keep aloof, says Yahweh. Touch nothing that is unclean, and I will welcome you and be your father, and you shall be my sons and daughters, says the Almighty. Can you imagine that? Every one of us now is a temple of the living Elohim. Yeah, there is a temple that was a model of the heavenly one. There is a heavenly one that our bodies are models of. You as body, soul, and spirit are a model, a little model of the temple. Now, an unbeliever, his spirit, his holy of holies, is dead. We were all born with our spirit dead. Growing up from growing up from childhood. Our flesh and our soul are in cahoots with one another, and what the soul wants, the body gives it. What the body wants, the soul gives it. They're in cahoots with one another. That's the old man. But remember, what does being born again mean? Being born again means that your spirit, which died in Adam, now is regenerated. It is now born again. Now you are born. And the moment you're born again, the Ruach Elohim comes to dwell in you. And through the Ruach Elohim, that communication between your spirit, the Ruach Elohim, and Elohim himself, the Father and the Son, is complete. And there's communication. And now you become his temple. You are the temple of Elohim. Therefore, we must not graffiti this temple. We must not destroy this temple. We must not come against this temple in any way, but do whatever we can to allow this temple in the little years that we have. Think of it. We only, every one of us, Ecclesiastes says, is just a puff of wind. There came that one, there it went. There came that one, there it went. There he was born, there he died. And that's all we are. But in that little time, that little time, we're that temple. And we could glorify Elohim in my temple. In my temple, I want to glorify you. I don't want to use my temple for idols. I don't want to use my temple because since we're the temple of Elohim and Elohim lives in us, can you imagine bringing harlotry into a church, into a temple? That'd be an abomination. That was part of the abomination in Israel when Antiochus and other people, for those years, they would bring harlotry. There was harlotry. There was homosexual harlotry and fornication in the temple of Adonai. And the kavod of Adonai left. The kavod of Adonai will leave. But we are the temple. Now, a part that I wanted to get into that I ran out of time 5 minutes ago had to do with Yeshua. But you could study this yourself, Yeshua. Yeshua, let's go to Matthew. I'm sorry. Matthew 24. Yeshua left the temple, and as he was going away, his disciples came to him to draw attention to the temple buildings. And he said to them in reply, "You see these things? I tell you solemnly, not a single stone will be left." He had just come into Jerusalem. In fact, in verse 37 and 38, he says, "Your house will be left to you desolate." What Yeshua is saying here, again, I wish I could really tie these up, because if you continue reading 1 Kings 6, 7, and 8, one of the things that Solomon in his prayer, and Adonai tells Solomon, if you follow me and your sons follow me, this temple and this city will live forever. Go just straight into the New Jerusalem. But if you are disobedient, then I will leave this temple desolate. Now watch this. Yeshua, the second temple, the renewed temple of Zerubbabel that had been remodeled by Herod. Israel, the Pharisees, the Sadducees. Israel, there was only a few devout people. There was Zechariah, there was Hannah, there was Joseph and Miriam, and there was Simeon, Zechariah, Elisheva, the disciples. But Israel was lost. Israel was disobedient in rebellion. And Yeshua says, your house is going to be desolate. I'm going to destroy this temple and in 3 days build it up. It took so many years. How can you do it? Yeshua was talking about his body. Now, the temple is also the body of Yeshua, which we are. And his body was destroyed. He died a physical death. But in 3 days and 3 nights, that temple was rebuilt. And the temple, the body of Yeshua, is now standing at the right hand of Elohim, ready to come back. And that's a whole sermon in itself. Let's stand. Father, we thank you. I wish we could go on, Father, but there's so much into your Torah. I wish, Father, for eternity, we're going to be there soaking up your word, your ways. Father, bless each one as we continue our studies. May each one go home to see if these things be so. Not only that we could encourage each one, Father, today, but, Father, that we could learn your Torah, so that your Torah would make us be those men and women you've called us to be. Father, there's so many today. But what we have, the bread that we received, may it nourish us spiritually. Yaverechecha Yaveh ba'ish merecha. A'ir Yaveh panav elecha v'ichunecha. Asa Yaveh panav elecha v'yasem lecha. Shalom. May Yahweh bless you and keep you. May Yahweh make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May Yahweh lift up the light of his countenance upon you and give you his peace. Shalom, shalom. Amen.